well. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. Beaverton, Oregon. Scappoose and Redmond as well. We have students from Silverton. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on our virtual field trip. We are live today in Yamhill, Oregon at Van Dyke Farms. My name is Bella, and I'm a student at Oregon State University, and I'll be the moderator today. Before we start our tour today, I wanted to go over a few logistics to make sure we have a great experience. We've muted everyone, and everyone will remain muted throughout the tour so we can hear our tour guide clearly. If you have questions, you can send them to us using the chat feature or using the form below the video on our website. Please only type questions to us in the chat. This will help us see all of the questions and ask as many as possible. It is now my pleasure to introduce our host and tour guide for today's virtual field trip, Ben Van Dyke. Take it away, Ben.
Good morning. Hey, it is so good to be with you guys this morning. Thank you for coming on the field trip out to our hazelnut orchard. Just so you know, I'm excited because I have a 5th grader and a 3rd grader also. So you guys are the same age as my kids. So I'm excited to tell you guys about what we do out here on the farm. So we're going to first look at the tree, what a hazelnut tree is. And we're in the middle of harvest right now, but today we're slowed down a little bit because of the rain. So we're going to show you a little bit about what goes into picking up the hazelnuts and what it takes to get them out of the field so that they can be processed and turned into some products that you guys love. I'm sure one of those is probably Nutella. So this is where Nutella starts. Let's just begin with that. So let's look at the tree real quick. So this is a 7-year-old tree. So I planted this one from a 1-year-old little tie-off. And 7 years now, it has grown to this big. Down further in the field, they're actually taller than this, but they don't grow as great up here on the hillside. But this tree is producing. And so if you look onto the ground, we have some hazelnuts that have already fallen. So hazelnuts naturally fall out of the tree when they're ripe. And so we just kind of have to wait for them. So today it's going to blow a little bit. We're going to get a little bit of rain, which is all going to help the hazelnuts fall out of the tree onto the ground so we can pick them up. But they start living in these husks. So inside this husk are all the hazelnuts. And so as we get sunshine and rain and wind, they release from this husk and fall onto the ground so that we can pick them up. So as you can see, this tree is still loaded with hazelnuts. We come through a couple different times to pick them up. And the main reason is because it's much easier to pick them up when it's warm and dry than it is when it's muddy and wet. So if we can get in early and get them picked up, it's more for us to try to get them up off the ground and get them into the processor so they're ready to go. On this tree, a couple more things that I want you guys to notice though. There's clusters all up and down these limbs, but behind these same clusters are catkins. So hazelnuts are known as the tree that never sleeps because this catkin right here is the part that produces the pollen that's going to pollinate in February of this year. And that's what's going to make the nuts for the next season. These are not going to be here next year as they fall off and they're gone. But at that little point right there is where the next cluster for next year is going to be starting. So these trees are always in a cycle. They go dormant. These leaves, as you can tell, are starting to fall off, and they'll do that. These trees will be barren all winter, but even in the middle of winter, in the middle of that cycle, these are going to open up and pollinate in February. And underneath, there will be a tiny little purple flower that's really hard to see, and those will capture the pollen. That'll capture the pollen, and then it just sits there until about May of next year when that process starts and it starts developing the nut for next year. So they're really a cool tree because of that cycle. They're kind of different than most things that are out there. So, but this is a Jefferson hazelnut tree is the variety. So Jefferson produces a little bit larger nut, and this nut is utilized in two different ways. They either use it in the shell. A lot of these go to China because part of their cultural experience around their Chinese New Year is to enjoy these with their family. And so they like them in the shell. It's part of what they do when they gather with their family is they sit around and eat hazelnuts. And so that's a pretty cool feature. And one of the great things about living in the Pacific Northwest is we're really close to the ports in Portland. So we can put them on a container ship and get them to China. And so we have a market that's fairly close in the world's arena of agriculture to get them to another country to utilize them in that. The other thing that these are good for also is a kernel. So we'll show you that in just a minute. But inside of that kernel is the actual hazelnut itself. But as you can see, this field's planted in rows. Hazelnut trees are planted this way so that we can harvest them. It's basically a harvest efficiency is why we do this. Our rows are 19 feet apart, and our trees right now, when they're young, a 7-year-old hazelnut tree is a really young tree, are planted 11 feet apart. We're going to come in a couple years and take every other one of these trees out so that they continue to grow up, because these trees are going to probably get to be about 4 times as big when they're fully mature. They'll canopy clear over. We have to have special tractors that drive underneath them so that they don't hit the branches and we can actually get underneath them. But that's kind of the general layout of a hazelnut orchard. And that's why we put them in rows and why we harvest them like that. So, but if you guys have some questions, why don't you go ahead and throw those in the chat. We're going to walk over here and look at this cart full of hazelnuts that we picked up yesterday.
Wonderful. We do have lots of questions for you, so I will ask a few of those for you. How many different varieties of hazelnuts are there?
That's a really good question. There's newer varieties that are out there that OSU, Oregon State University, helped develop because the older varieties started getting a disease that we had to try to breed a new variety that was resistant to that disease, which was called a blight, Eastern filbert blight. So this Jefferson variety is resistant to that. And then there's about 7 more varieties that are resistant to that also. Total varieties of hazelnuts, I'm kind of unclear because old ones kind of come and go, but probably within Oregon, for what we do, there's probably about 10 total varieties that we deal with. Got another question for me quick?
Sure. The next question is, why is the ground of the hazelnut orchard so bare?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the ground is so bare, we keep it that way. And it's all for harvest efficiency. In a second, we're going to go look at a harvester. But when we put it into a row and try to lift it up, to pick up every one of these hazelnuts that you see sitting here, they're really small. The biggest one, they talk millimeters, is about 20 to 24 millimeters. And our smallest ones are about 10. So you're talking pretty small little nut that we have to try to rake up off the ground. And if we left a bunch of grass or other row middle in the middle of our rows, we wouldn't be able to actually lift them up out of there. And so we'd leave a bunch of the hazelnuts and won't be able to pick them up. Now we are concerned about the ground being this barren. And so what our farm does is we actually will come in here right after harvest with a bunch of oat seed, and we come and seed this whole thing. So that way it grows all winter long, and when it rains, we don't get a bunch of erosion and the soil stays where it's supposed to. Plus it kind of helps rejuvenate the soil in between the trees. It's called cover cropping. And so we'll do that in the middle of the winter. And then in the springtime, we kill it out and we start over again and we get to this bare floor for harvest. So, but this hazelnut, I'm going to show you real quick. So inside, here's the shell. This is a whole bin of nuts that we harvested last night. I'll use my fancy bolt hammer here. So inside, and I cracked it too hard because I split the nut in half. So let me try this again. So inside the shell is the nut. So shell came out in a couple pieces, and there's your hazelnut right out of a shell. So that hazelnut, this is called the kernel. So we have some varieties that are smaller than this that we use in the kernel. So I don't know how many of you guys enjoy some hazelnut candies like Ferrero Rocher's little candy or some of those other things, but inside of them is a hazelnut. This would actually be too big for that candy. And so they actually want some smaller ones, and the shell's not as thick on the other varieties. So those are called kernel type varieties. And but this one can go either way. We can either leave it in shell, send it to China, or they can make a kernel out of it and go from there. Now, when you go to Nutella, they're going to take this and it's going to go through a roasting process. They're going to remove this light little layer of skin that's on the outside, and then they're actually going to roast it and then put it into a paste and put it inside your Nutella. So Ferrero Rocher, the company that makes Nutella, they only take #1 quality hazelnuts to put in Nutella. So you're getting the very best product when you put a big spoonful of that on your pancakes in the morning. So we're going to walk over to a picker here, but I'll listen to some more questions if you have them.
We sure do. A question is, how much water do hazelnut trees need?
Yes. So hazelnut trees and water, they actually will grow in Western Oregon dry land, meaning we would not have to irrigate them. In that practice, the rainfall that we get in the wintertime is enough to keep the soil moist through the spring. And then that will just kind of, they'll have enough moisture to get clear through to harvest. So that was kind of old standard practice. We can get better yields if we irrigate. So a lot of the new orchards are on irrigation, drip irrigation, and or overhead. This one we still use overhead irrigation to kind of increase our yields. Do you have another one for me?
The next question is, what happens to hazelnuts that fall on the ground but don't get harvested?
Yeah, so hazelnuts that fall on the ground that don't get harvested get to live there all winter long. We're not able to, if we don't get to pick them up, then they're there. They turn into squirrel food and bird food, which actually are two of our biggest crop robbers, if you will. So they will come in and steal those from us. And so, yeah, anything that we don't get picked up just gets put in the ground. We mow through these orchards a couple times. So eventually a mower is going to come through and break that open, and then it'll just break down and go back into the soil. So, but I wanted to show you guys a pickup machine. So it's a little bit hard to tell, but like I said, this is one of the specialty tractors that we have to run that has a cage on the outside of it. And it's not just to look cool, and it's not for rolling over. What it actually does is it lifts the branches when we get to them and lifts them up over the top of the tractor. Because when we get in our older orchards, those trees will be clear over the top of us. And so we just have to keep them off the tractor as we drive through it. But then the hazelnuts, I don't have a sweeper here with us today, but they drive through and they rake it into a row. So if you've ever seen hay being raked, it's kind of a similar process. And we drive up and down and we rake those nuts up into a row. This drives over the top of that little row and it feeds into the front of the picker right here. So then as it comes in, inside there, there's tiny little teeth and a belt that helps pick them up. And then they come up here and they fall onto a set of chains, which I'll show you back here. And they come through this machine. And as you look at this chain, you'll notice that there's holes in it. So those holes are important because when we rake up, we get a bunch of dirt and we get a bunch of debris, but it bounces around on this chain as it comes through the machine and it falls through here and goes back onto the ground. Otherwise, we get a whole bunch of junk in our hazelnuts when they come up. The other thing that it does is right here is a big giant fan that takes all the horsepower that that tractor has to turn inside here. And that's lifting air and then it shoots it out the other side with a whole bunch of dirt, dust, and debris as it goes through, and it pulls all the junk and the sticks. I shouldn't say all of it, most of the junk and the sticks out and blows it out of the way. Then the nuts continue up, and they come back here into our reservoir cart. So then they get in here, and we use those other green carts that I showed you that will come back behind us. And we back that machine up into it, and then this belt dumps into that green cart, and it goes to the truck to unload. And this machine turns and goes down the next row and just continues on. So this is a reservoir cart that gets pulled behind the picker. As you can see, we broke down last night, so everything's sitting here full, waiting for the belt to come back so we can actually load the truck. So, but yeah, I'd love some more questions if you have them.
I sure do. One question is, how did you start your farm?
Right. So our farm is a third generation farm. So my grandfather started it here after he came back from World War II. So when I grew up on the farm, we didn't actually grow hazelnuts. We grew grass seed, clover seed, and wheat. And so I took it over from my dad and my uncle. And once we did that, I planted a few different crops to try to diversify. It's the cool part about Western Oregon is that we have lots of opportunities to diversify our cropping. So we just kind of watch and look for things that can provide more value for the land that we have. And so blueberries was the first one I did. And like I said, 7 years ago, we started planting hazelnuts. And this is actually the very first orchard that I planted that we're standing in today.
Awesome. And how many trees are in your orchard?
You know, that's a really good question. There is probably this orchard to be about 62,000 trees by the time you do the double density. Once we take them out, be about 30,000 trees by the time we take the extra ones out here in a few years.
And what do you do with the trees that you pull out of the orchard?
Unfortunately, they will get ground up and they turn into nothing once we do it. So when we take them out, they run a big grinder through here that grinds up all the plant material and puts it back in the soil. But there's no way to transplant that tree to another place. Hazelnuts are kind of a shallow rooted tree, and so there's no way to move it to a new orchard. That tree has just lived out its life cycle at about year 10, and will get back, turn back into the soil for nutrients for the other trees.
How old are the trees when they start producing hazelnuts?
Yeah, so we can start picking up hazelnuts on about third leaf, which is year 3. So it's gone through 3 cycles. It's not very many hazelnuts. You will get maybe 20 nuts underneath a tree. It really doesn't pay to go pick them up, but we don't want to start feeding too many squirrels and birds. So we go through and we pick them up just to get them up out of the orchard so they're not there. And then it just keeps increasing in the yield, and the yield's almost double for about the next 5 years as it goes along.
And do you know how many hazelnuts on average you can get from a single tree?
From a single tree? Yeah, I have to do the math on this one here. You're going to stretch me. Yeah, you're going to get about 20 pounds to 25 pounds off of a tree. Is probably about what we're picking up out here.
Awesome. And how are hazelnuts packaged, or how are they shipped on different shipping methods?
Yeah. So we do most everything bulk. And so, like I said, we move them in big semi trucks from here to the wash plant. It has a whole nother process these have to go through where they remove all the sticks, stems, soil. They go through some big trommels or rotating drums, and they get a bunch of water that washes it all off. And then after that, they have to get dried. So when they come out of the field here, they're about 20% moisture to 22% moisture, which if you left them like that, they would mold and rot. And so they go into big dryers, and inside that dryer, we have to dry them down to 9% moisture. And once it gets down to there, they're safe to store. We can actually store them for about a year at that soil moisture, and they won't, or at that moisture, and they won't mold. So the ones that go to China from that point on, they bag them into 20-kilogram bags to go to China. And so just like a gunny sack or like a feed bag, if you know what that looks like. And then those get loaded into shipping containers and go to the port and get shipped to China. The kernel ones, a lot of times those stay bulk because they get processed here in Oregon in different processing facilities. And then they end up in a 40-pound box of whatever that is. And they get kind of cold stored until they need to move on to the confectioner or the baker or whoever is going to use them as the end product.
Awesome. How big can a hazelnut get?
Yeah. So the tree itself depends on the variety. The other half of this orchard is a Yamhill variety, and it's going to be a short, stubby little tree its whole life. It's not going to get to be real big. But a mature hazelnut, we actually have problems with them getting too tall, and we bring machines in that actually top them. Because they're shallow rooted, if we get a big windstorm, sometimes they can tip over. And so we try to manage them, but they can get up to 30 to 40 feet tall when they're grown in an orchard like this, because they try to just keep competing for sunlight, so they keep growing up. So we just have to kind of manage that. That Yamhill hazelnut tree, it's probably never going to get over about 25 feet.
How many trees do you lose to storms since they are shallow rooted?
Yeah, we do lose some to storms. Actually, behind me here, the bigger problem we have is the river comes off out of its banks every year. And so when that happens, the water comes and tries to tip them over. The ice storm that we had last year was another big problem. These little trees were just fine. We broke some limbs when that ice hung on them and weighted them down. So we broke some limbs off, but in our bigger mature orchards, that ice load was just too heavy, and it either broke limbs or it tipped the whole tree over. Now they are shallow rooted, and there's some tricks we can do to try to help them. We can actually come in with an excavator and dig the side that they tipped off of and tip them back up and stake them. And if you do that, you probably get about 70 to 80% of them that'll live and just continue on from there. But sometimes we lose them to storms, but it just depends on where you're at and how big the storm is. But we figure there's usually about a 2 to 3% tree loss every year in the orchard, whether that be from a storm or the tree just dies, or a multitude of other things. But that's about as many trees as we have to replace a year in an orchard.
Do hazelnuts need washing? And if so, how is that done?
Yeah. So they have to get washed in, and it's not on site in the field. They go to the next step in the process, which is a wash plant. And in that, it's almost a big giant wash machine that they spin inside that drum, and all the junk and the dirt, the debris come out. But as they go, it just continually moves through the process. So, like I said, they can process depending on the plant that we take it to, but about probably 20,000 pounds an hour is about what they can move through that wash process. So all the hazelnuts in Oregon have to get washed and dried. They get picked up. And that all has to get done in about 10 days after they get picked up off the ground, so they don't mold and rot. So right now there is a lot of busy wash plants running in the state of Oregon. And and all this product has to get moved through in the next couple of weeks.
What hazelnut products are there besides Nutella?
Yeah. So there are becoming more and more hazelnut products all the time. So everyone knows there's candied hazelnuts, things that they get coated in chocolate, they get coated in all sorts of things, toffees. A lot of people eat them just roasted and salted, which is actually my favorite way to eat them. So they shell them and they roast them and salt them. So like you'd eat a mixed nut of any other kind. Besides that, they're starting to use them a lot more in like salad topping, in breads and bakery goods. As we are getting more hazelnuts in the state of Oregon, we're actually able to put them out into more products. For a long time, the biggest problem in Oregon was we actually did not grow enough hazelnuts. So Oregon, while this seems like a big crop to us in the western part of the state, Oregon's only 3% of the world market. So the biggest producer of hazelnuts is the country of Turkey, and that country produces, I believe, 70% of the world's hazelnuts. And so while we think we have trees going in everywhere in Western Oregon, even if we planted the whole entire valley, we'd never be over 10% of the world market. So as we're growing more, companies within the United States are actually being able to develop new products with them, which is a really interesting thing to watch happen. So you're going to start seeing them in more cereal blends and more granola bars and all sorts of places that you find regular mixed nuts, which is an exciting part for the industry.
Awesome. Okay, we have time for one question, and that is, what is your favorite part of being a hazelnut farmer?
My favorite part of a hazelnut farmer is harvest. It is madness, and I'm disappointed you guys don't get to see that today, but there is just a lot of stuff going on all at once. It takes a lot of people and a lot of time. We make a lot of dust, and but at the end of the day, it is so rewarding to know all the hard work that we've gone into, because this is a year after year crop. This is something at year one when we were planting it, watching this baby twig turn into this tree. It's pretty rewarding at harvest time just to see loads of nuts get hauled off the field, knowing that somebody's going to get to enjoy that, hopefully with their family, hopefully whether it's the people in China with their family at their Chinese New Year, or it's a Christmas box that you got, or as you sit down to eat pancakes with Nutella on, like my daughter does every morning, you get to enjoy the product that we work so hard to make.
Awesome. Well, we are out of time today for our virtual field trip, but before we log off, I just want to say thank you so much to Ben Van Dyke for sharing so much information about hazelnuts with us. I know I learned so much, and we hope you all did too. We hope everyone has a great rest of their day.